I'm Alex Lebiter, GSMA's Technical Security Director, and I'm going to take us through, wait for them to align the slides. So I'm going to take us through the what next, really. So over the last couple of days, and for those that were here for the landscape session, we spent some time with the previous panel looking at where are we today? So what are the things, the pain points, the things from both a vertical perspective, an industry perspective, a mobile operator perspective that we should be concerned about? We've been through a number of scenarios, including the API fintech sort of aspects that Brian just led through. What we're now going to go on is look at the future. I think, as was pointed out actually near the end of the previous panel, which I've written down on my notes, nothing stands still, and indeed it never does. Cybersecurity is one of those things that every time we improve it slightly, the attackers look at that and go, well, is it worth the investment in improving our attacks? So it's all about continuously raising the bar. For every security vulnerability we fix, somebody's always going to put in some effort to find a new one. So, I mean, the good perspective is it's going to keep us busy. The bad perspective is it's going to keep us increasingly busy. So, similarly, we've talked about earlier in the event the increasing want for 5G on private 5G to be the backbone of enterprise and also vertical enablement. But critically, it's also going to be the backbone of critical national infrastructure. So we have to consider that the things that are on the network will become of more value to the attackers, and ultimately any security defense is a trade-off between risk, threat, and motivation. So what motivates the attackers to go after assets, and how much effort are they willing to put in? As we've also noted in the IoT session earlier, strangely, IoT doesn't seem to be becoming more secure. I think it's worth a note of some statistics that David Rogers from the Fraud and Security Group had acquired earlier in the year. When we started looking at IoT security in GSMA and also ETSI, around about 8% of IoT vendors had a Coordinated Vulnerability Disclosure Scheme, CVD. The great news is in 2023, we have succeeded in about a 500% improvement as the mobile industry. Now, that's a very, very large number. Until you work out what that actually is in percentage terms, it's about 29% of vendors have got one of these. So it depends on how you cut it, but clearly we're going to do better. Regulation is clearly playing a part, and that's something we're about to touch on. And as also pointed out in the last panel, we have to consider both the regional and the global perspective in this. It's not one or the other, it is both. And I kind of like the opening at the beginning of the day, before we go and look at the panel, the conversation around 10 years of R&D in a single year equivalent for the Formula E Extreme. So with that, we're going to look at perhaps not 10 years in the future, but slightly shorter. So if I can ask my panelists to make their way down. There we go. The slides have caught up for me. So Kirsty, Pablo, Zig, and Paul will work their way forward. I'll keep the seat nearest to me, please. Other than that, take your pick. And what we're now going to do is have a discussion around where we go from here. So what do we think the 24 onwards landscape is going to look like? And also I want to explore what is it that the industry needs to provide in terms of some of the vertical capabilities. So we talked about 5G, but what would 6 have to deliver? And there may well be an opportunity for the audience questions as well. So with that, I'm going to come this way, and I'm going to ask my panelists essentially to introduce themselves, starting with Kirsty. So if you can give us a quick intro as to who you are, where you're from, an initial opening thought for the future.
Okay. Small ask to start.
Absolutely.
If the microphone works, that would be ideal. No? I know it's okay.
Do we have the mics at the back?
And it's switched on.
Is it plugged in?
Right, if
I
not.
can shout if no drama. Okay. Thank you. Well, that was a good intro. Hi, everyone. My name is Kirsty Payne and I work for Splunk, which is a data platform company. Why am I talking about futures? Before I worked for Splunk, I worked for the UK government, for NCSC, where my whole job was to look at technologies that would affect the UK in 5 to 10 years' time and assess the security impact on the UK. And so that actually leads a lot into looking at technical standards, believe it or not. The thrill of 5G and quantum and IoT and AI, I looked at it all before it was popular. So that's my kind of qualification to look into the future, a bit of navel gazing, and I continue to do that job at Splunk as a field CTO, which is very, very fun. A quick thought for the future, I think it may already be AI o'clock. I'm going to talk about AI. I think that we'll see the hype curve decrease, right? So we'll actually see some people actually using things like machine learning for great effect. That's my very light prediction to start us off. It works now. Okay. Check, check. Thank you.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No.
It's okay, you can borrow this one.
Okay, I'm Zig. I'm head of quantum networking in IBM Research. And before that, I spent a number of years as the chief engineer for telecoms in IBM. The thing that I guess I'm most interested in is what's both the benefits and challenges that quantum computing will bring, both in terms of what we can do next and also the potential risks if bad actors get access to them. And for an extra twist, we can also throw in your point about what happens when our one of the threats we're having to deal with is also driven by AI and machine learning and access to those systems by wicked people.
Okay. Is this working? I'm looking there. Oh, there you go. We've got it. Is this the very last session of the day?
It is indeed.
Oh, wow. Right, we're going to liven that a bit then. So, well, we're going to make an attempt at it, so you'll score us at the end. My name's Paul Truman. I'm in MasterCard. I'm in cyber intelligence. If any of you went up to the bond room earlier on and had a look at what we were doing there, that's the kind of recognition that people still sometimes think we just do payments. But the whole point of doing payments is understand you need to know both ends and then the whole ecosystem. So the whole point, and that was a great previous conversation because I spent most of this afternoon talking to one of the major banks about the movement in scams, how they could do it and how they could move from learning in the UK, which has got a lot of the, of course, we look after Vocalink, so we've got 95% of all the payments going on in the UK, and how this can move other places. So I think that's really interesting. I'm going to take a contrary view on it, which is I think we should take another little look at the criminals, because the criminals are no longer moving at the rate of industry. They are multiplying at a phenomenal rate. So there today, criminal activity, cybercrime is about $6 trillion. It's anticipated to be $10.5 trillion by 2025. I was recently chastised by my comms person for saying, if that was a business, it's worth investing in, because that's phenomenal. Yeah. And the reason they're doing this is that firstly, they've adopted technology because they've realized that the idea of wearing a balaclava and carrying a shotgun was a futile exercise, and they can only do it once, and then they have to run away. Now they can get exercises, they can use technology, and they're doing it in a really interesting way. And they've also worked out the greatest advantage of digital, which is value chain. So now, rather than having to plan the bank attack and do the bank attack, you just need to do a little bit somewhere in the middle. And all the splices put together mean you no longer have one criminal, you have 100, and they're all playing in very collaborative ways. So we'll come back to collaboration later on, but it's a really critical part is they're starting to work out how to use digital to their advantage, which hides them a little bit, but really increases the significant threat we're going to get out there.
Pablo.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Pablo Jacopino. I'm the head of research at GSMA Intelligence. GSMA Intelligence is the research and consulting organization of the GSMA. And what we do is we provide our customers and the mobile industry with data, insights, and research across all the important topics that are shaping the ecosystem, from 5G to private networks, IoT, as well as security. And looking at the future, what I'm looking forward to is perhaps more discussions about how we can turn this investment in security capability into revenue opportunities. So obviously, we come to the security aspect with a cost and investment perspective, but we can monetize it in different ways. And I will share some insights about this in terms of what operators are doing.
Cool, thank you. Well, I think we're going to start by a little bit of a a run round the panel. I mean, we've had some interesting opening remarks. What I'm now going to press you on a little bit more is, from your individual perspectives, what do you think we're going to see a change in either the approaches of the attackers, the risks, or indeed the use cases and the areas in which security will need to adapt over the next sort of year or two? So I'm going to start with Paul, actually, because you specifically talked about the threat actors and their ability to collaborate and go sort of up and down the value chain. How do you think they're going to adapt and exploit, and therefore we need to think about new ways of defending?
Well, I mean, I had to take an extra piece out and start writing notes on the last session because, you know, the idea of romance scams was existing in the Victorian times. All they've done is work out how to take that technology and use it at scale. So their game is a scale game, yeah, whenever they're trying to do it. I also came across a recent example of money laundering that was going on where cash had been converted into cryptocurrency, and where the normal view on money laundering is someone's going to take about 50%. So give them $100, they'll take $50 back to pay the... This guy was working on 4% margin. Yeah? He reckoned at 4% margin he could officially put it through, slice it through, and no one's going to worry him, which is very similar to the first-party fraud conversation we have. It's Jeff Bezos. He's not going to worry. He's not going to miss it. And that's not the attitude. The attitude is we need to stop all of that kind of activity going on, and we need to be cognizant of how they're using technology in different ways. So I would say that there isn't... A year ago, the discussion on scams was pretty low level, but now it's become just very noisy. And a lot of our time, and today I was on with a major bank talking about, we just launched, by the way, a product this week called Consumer Fraud Risk. It's on a Bloomberg release, and it's talking about trying to address how do we understand that in real-time payments, and not only can we trace it, but how can we then push the money back up the system, back into the people so that people don't lose out. But that is going to remain a clear and present problem. Criminals tend to work out when someone's taking money in an area, and then they tend to all load in there. And they're very good, by the way, at sharing some of their intelligence, how they do it. So if you're looking on the dark web, they're not actually selling a lot of it. They quite often give this stuff away because the more people that are doing it, it covers their tracks. So there's a lot of really interesting techniques there. I think that part of what we're trying to do is work out what are the critical things we need? And I think the most critical one comes back to where telcos are going to play an active part. And we'll cover that later on, which is this whole idea of connectivity and collaboration. They're the two things you pretty much talked about since Matt stepped on stage earlier on. And that's it. And I think that good example of where the banks are working with the telcos, or we're working with the banks on launching new products, that's going to be a critical part of the forward story. So, you know, watch this space because there's so much more we can do. But as we said recently when I had a regulator conversation, I said, we can talk about it, or we can absolutely do it, because there's no point putting blame. The point is we need to solve the problems, and it only happens with the people in the industry who have opportunity, but they also have potential threat against their businesses. So collaboration around the connectivity is going to be critical for me.
So solving problems, Kirsty, from your perspective, how do you think we're going to see change in the short term?
It always for me comes down to incentives, and I'll talk about this all the time because it sounds great, you know, have this collaboration, we beat the criminals, but why didn't we do that yesterday? So it being honest, what are the barriers, what are the blockers? And yes, it's hard, but we do a lot of difficult things. Like, we're technologists, we work in a difficult technical space, everything's changing, so why aren't we doing it now? And it's a real question because I don't have the answer to that. I wish I did. But something where we know what we're incentivized to do, why we're doing it. We have that clear shared purpose mission. I think some of the prototyping work and kind of proof of concepts that go on is very good in getting people to believe that it's possible. But then what next? So you said that the criminals operate at scale. How can we operate at that scale? I'd love to think that we are keeping up. I don't think that we are. I think that if we used all the tools available to us properly, then we might have a fighting chance. So, I mean, the way I see it changing in the short term, there has to be some sort of like Titanic event, really. This is the way I see it. So when the Titanic sunk, there was a huge change in maritime law. Everyone went, oh my gosh, what? You don't have to have an anchor watch. There's no regulation around this. And everything changed, right? You have to have lifeboats with enough capacity. You have to have certain things put in place. And we haven't had that yet. So when we see this kind of massive event, I think that's when we'll see real change. I would love for it to not get to that point, right? I'd love us to stay ahead enough that we don't have such a cataclysmic collapse of something where, and I know this sounds pretty doomy for like the end of the day, and you said to keep it upbeat, but no. It's kind of a wake-up call, right? Like with IoT as well, like what are you waiting for to secure the IoT? We know it's broken. We know there's lots of things that you could be doing yesterday. If you've had an IoT product at any point in the last 5 years, why haven't you got ahead of the legislation that's coming out? Why haven't you proactively chosen to improve that security? And it comes down to incentives, right? Maybe your boss isn't convinced, maybe it's not gonna do well for your product margins, but that's where we need to make sure that, you know, governments regulate to make sure that the market is incentivizing you, or that there's some sort of peer-to-peer recognition effect, or there's, I don't want to say name and shame, but there's got to be something that makes you take the situation seriously.
So iceberg dead ahead, really. So Pablo, perhaps from your perspective, I mean, from the data and things that GSMAI collects, how do you see the change? And then I'm going to come to Zig for the big quantum question shortly afterwards. But from your perspective, where do you see this going?
So when we do research on security, we do that by talking with operators, consumers. From an operator perspective, what we see is that the security is now top of the agenda. When you ask operators, hey operators, you are transforming your networks. So that means that you have a network transformation strategy. What is your priority? The top two priorities are sustainability, obviously, and security. Security means device security, network security, as well as service security. So definitely security is the top of the agenda, and operators are investing in building the right security capabilities. Also, they are trying to understand how to monetize that. They are investing in security capabilities. How do you monetize that? When you look at the financial results of the operators, you see that within the B2B space, which is the area of growth for operators, security is one of the leading areas of growth. It's cloud and security. And this is a trend that has been accelerated by the COVID pandemic. So operators are reporting a double-digit revenue growth in security, which is a good number. Still room for growth, but it's definitely a solid base to start with. And when I say security, revenue is enterprise and consumer. We talk a lot about IoT enterprise, but as Kirsty said, there is a consumer angle. What we see from our consumer survey is that consumers have an interest in subscribing to security services, which means that they don't feel comfortable to use some of the digital services. That's an opportunity to provide these services to consumers and make consumers feel safe.
Well, perhaps we'll come back to the trust theme, because it's come up repeatedly. So Zig, before we get to the big quantum question, I'm going to give you the sort of intro run to this. Perhaps your thoughts on, obviously quantum will come along, but ignoring the quantum piece to start with, from an IBM perspective, where do you see the change happening, both in terms of the mobile ecosystem, but also that the attacks and threats will be defending?
Okay, so what seems to, if you look at what happens in terms of the attacks, what you're basically seeing is the emergence of an industry. There's a fairly well set up supply chain. There are people who provide tech support, there are people who provide payloads, there are people who provide exploits, and there are people who orchestrate the entire process. So you've got an industry, a dark industry, generating the attacks, and we need to respond by using the best tools we have to spot what's going on early, and then to ideally to proactively, to automatically respond, rather than necessarily waiting for an analyst in a SOC to go through and work out what this particular compromise indicator means, and oh, that means, right? If we can automate that process, we are at least starting to respond on the same time cycle as the attackers. We've got an industry, we have to respond as an industry.
So moving to the quantum question, and for those who are on LinkedIn, I do suggest searching out Zig on LinkedIn, There is a particularly good photo of late of him standing next to one of the latest quantum computers. It's quite impressive if you want to see what a quantum computer actually is. But moving on from that, clearly quantum is going to be one of the things that's going to affect us. As we move towards 6G, we are going to have to consider quantum native, which we didn't for 5, and indeed may be quite difficult to do with 5G, given some of the signaling protocol limitations. How much of an impact do you think it's going to be, and in terms of what do we need to be doing, especially with the private 5G and those now investing quite a lot into new sort of 5G usage to make sure we're going to be ready for that, either the next set of attacks or in fact the next set of defense we'll need?
Right. So I think there's a general agreement, starting basically with both the US and the Chinese government, that we need to ensure that the systems we build are secure against someone who has access to a quantum computer. Okay, there's general agreement on that, and the US has a timeline for the federal government between now and 2033. So don't panic, but start building out the capability. So if we think about that in the case of mobile, what does that mean? Well, we need to think about how we secure our cloud infrastructure, the NFVI, the public clouds we use. We need to think about the OSS and BSS systems. We need to think about identity management, the PKIs, and ultimately about the devices, the air interface, and the standards. Now, there's a whole load of things there. So we do what we do with any boring task like this. We build a project plan and we work our way through it. And advertisement, that's one of the things the GSMA is doing. There is a task force in the GSMA looking at exactly this problem and mapping out what you need to do. So, number one thing to do, make sure somebody in your organization understands the problem and the risk and has the skills to be able to help build that plan. Just do the good, boring engineering stuff of understand what you need to do.
It's always the good, boring engineering stuff that's important. So, Paul, I mean, looking very much to you next, PKI has underpinned an awful lot of the mobile payment security and other things for pretty much several generations. And as we look to produce private 5G, etc., how do you think we need to prepare, and what can the mobile industry do to support the banking financial sector in terms of that preparation for quantum, or indeed other aspects that will go with that in terms of that agility? Because most of it's agility today, not doing it today. It's preparing for the doing.
Yeah, I mean, today, at the moment, the conversation is all about AI and generative AI. And then I've got the quantum conversation I thought was going to be the killer until I came across the Titanic, because that clearly wasn't in my plans. But I think it's really interesting is that the attacks always happen. You know, like I said, romance scams from Victorians, people got robbed, people got mugged, things happen. It will always happen. If you put it in context of technology moving on, I'm going to go old school here, and I'm going to think about driving a car. Yeah? So we know that cars are getting faster, and because cars are getting faster, we put more safety requirements in them and how they're going to crash and whatever else. But we also put rules of driving along the road. We say you drive on the left. You can't wake up on a Tuesday and say, you know what, today I'm going to drive on the right. Yeah, just see what happens. So you kind of set the rules in place. We also know at the end that most of the traffic, if we follow those rules and those guidelines and we do the right things, the protocols are in place, the technology is good, things will mostly work. But we also accept there will be accidents. And we accept accidents. The question is, can we get them to a manageable level? And that's the critical part here. And I think that, you know, I always come back to that question of trust, because I spent a lot of time working on trust with people like the World Economic Forum and thinking about what does trust mean. The best explanation, I've had a lot of explanations, but the one that I like the best is trust is about recognition and knowledge. So if I recognize you and I have some knowledge that you're a villain, I'm not going to go near you. And if I don't recognize you and then I learn to know you, and as things come on, I go, I don't know that. I'm not going to spend more time with this person. If you think about it, a lot of that is tying back to that people are inextricably connected to devices. And as they connect to their devices, if we can make an understanding of the ecosystem of devices, we can do a really nice job of understanding more of that. There was also the question raised, so the idea of, can I recognize you, can I have some knowledge about you? That sits in the data fields we talked about early on. It will become even more important when we start realizing that between synthetic voice playouts and deep fake imaging, that I'm not really going to be able to trust what I see in front of me anyway when I'm on a call in the future, because what I see may not be real. But what I do know is the data behind it can help me. So I have to overcome some of our human knowledge about how we think about the future. It's a psychology question as much as a technology question. So I think that's going to be part of the play, is how are we thinking about the future? Where do we see the key pieces to focus on? And how, when we think about our core skills sitting in telco, where do they play? And for me, the whole idea of the elements of identity, knowledge, and how we use that data in an effective way to ensure trust in the system is a critical part of payments, because to the point of commerce, it's about the sharing of commerce, of deals going on between two people that trust that if someone pays the money, someone's going to get the sheep. It's that kind of how does it go and work? And I think we've got to be real clear how we are pushing those forward. I think the good news is, and this is, and I'll leave you in a positive because I don't want to leave a Titanic moment on an afternoon of an end of a session, is we are putting a lot of effort in and we are thinking this through. And because we're doing that and because there's diligence on it, everybody's got a similar pace of where we want to get to. So I don't think it's that bad, but I do recognize that there's always opportunity for us to be significantly better.
So trust, and not a Titanic moment this time, Kirsty.
I'll keep it ugly. Yeah.
Quantum, should we be concerned, should we not be concerned? And, you know, perhaps from an agility perspective, where should we be going?
Okay, so keep it upbeat, right? So the answer, like every good security professional, should you be worried? It depends, right? It depends. So, you know, the risk is real, but it may not apply to you. So you mentioned governments, they have a lot of data that they need to keep secret for a very long time. So they have decided that data is vulnerable to the quantum threat, right? The text message I sent yesterday, I probably don't care about that in 10 years' time, 15 years' time, 30 years' time. Estimates of when a quantum computer will be ready vary, but it has always been about 15 years away, as long as I can remember. So it's a sliding scale. The other question is, when do you care, right? Like about your PKI, when you're signing something, you care if a quantum computer exists at the moment that you are doing that signing. If you look at lifetimes of certificates, they are mostly 3 months, sometimes a year. So if you think a quantum computer is happening in the next 3 months, I'd love to know why, and I'd love to know where you think it is. And then I'll go and play with it. But you've got other things in place, right? Policies that will protect you in that kind of situation. So really the risk depends. Don't panic, but do your preparation, right? So what would be good security practice anyway? That would be probably knowing everything you've got on your estate, your network, right? If you don't know all the bits of equipment you've got where, you should. And you should be making that asset inventory, right? And while you're doing that, why not just take a look at what cryptography you've got in there, so that when you get standards, when there are implementations available, you know what you would roll. The second thing is, what would you roll first? So let's say 10 years. In 10 years' time, how much of your equipment will you still be using? So how much of it would be end-of-life by that point? How much would you have changed new providers? Is there any point getting your quantum stuff in-house now, if in 10 years' time you'll probably have switched a lot of your equipment anyway, or end-of-lifed it? Okay, so make your asset inventory, prepare, like prioritize what you're actually going to roll first, and then when the time is right, when we've got implementations, when we've got standards, when things have been tested thoroughly, and the quantum risk is real for you, then roll. But that's, in my view, not fair. I mean, do I want to put a figure on it? Sure. 15 years away, I would say. So, and that's if your data is something you still want to keep secret in 15 years. So telemetry, you maybe don't care, but maybe you do. And that is entirely up to you. That depends.
So in true Dad's Army style, don't panic, Mr. Mannering, very much.
I'm not going to do the impression, but yeah.
Absolutely not. So Pablo, from your perspective, where do you see this going? Should we be sort of preparing ourselves in that next iteration for the quantum question, or are there other things we should prepare for instead, given agility and trust are the things we're actually worrying about?
I think we are in a very interesting situation because we all know that transformation is happening faster than ever before. when we think about innovation cycles, they are becoming shorter and shorter. So I think it makes sense to think about technologies that perhaps will become mainstream 10 years from now, 8, 12, who knows, and balance efforts with technologies that are happening now. There are many examples, quantum computing, but also 6G. We have started to talk about 6G and autonomous driving. So many technologies that will become mainstream in the future, probably not in the next 5 years, but it's important to talk about those, start exploring what they mean for us, and balance that with today's priorities, 5G, IoT.
So I had thought earlier in the panel that I might take the risk on the Ask the Audience question. Given the microphones and us managing to turn them on in the right order, I'm not going to take that risk. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to ask the panelists for their final sort of 6G, either ask or predictions. So what more should the industry do, or what more capabilities should we be adding in order to drive that next generation of services and capabilities that enterprises or others can leverage? So not what we've talked about today in private 5G, that's what we can do with what we've got, but what should we have, or what could we provide as the mobile industry to enable that next generation of trust, and therefore that next generation of iterative sort of and innovative use cases, which is really what the consumer wants, which is always at the heart of this, and why there's value in security. So I'm going to start with Paul.
I knew you were going to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going upbeat and around.
You know, the one guaranteed guy that's not on telco sitting talking about 6G. I think that the first question you do with technology, and especially when you're thinking about this, is think about the unintended consequences of that technology. And the people that are developing it, so like the conversation about quantum with, you know, with IBM, it's getting an understanding of what's it likely to do and how could it be used in nefarious formats. Because then if you're doing that, you can put elements and controls in against it. So you've got to think ahead. There is no point delivering a technology to market and then going, I never thought that was going to happen, or then start building the system. So there's no doubt about it. People in this room are thinking about building systems already towards those future standards. And that's a critical part. So we've got to think through that way of planning. I think that the other thing is that historically, when we've been facing those where someone comes up with a new piece, I always think about how we, and for the consumer, it's how do they get to adoption? Because sometimes you look at a piece of technology like open banking, or remember when contactless payments first came along and people went, I'm not doing that. I'm not tapping a card. If someone takes it, that's a lot of money gone. Truthfully, contactless is now used in 94% of payments today. We've seamlessly put it onto the mobile phone so that actually it's not just a card but a mobile phone. No one even thinks about it. And the fraud levels reduced. That's the point, is that's when good technology is. Because building technology as we see it is you're trying to build technology that not only makes things more secure, but as far as the consumer gets, they get a better experience. If they get a better experience, they'll adopt it. If they adopt it, you get scale. If you don't do that, we've always said you can make it more complex, just make longer passwords and more unusual characters, and no one does it. So come on, build better systems, build them with better security, but the promise at the front is better convenience for the consumer. And I think if we see 6G in those lights, we can kind of look through what do we need to put in place to make this a really good experience, and then behind the scenes we'll sort it out.
So build better, focus on the consumer. Zig.
Okay. First observation, 6G is not very far away. It's 2 years away, because we have to have got a pretty good idea of what we will put into the standards by 2025 at the latest for the 3GPP machine to turn out real specification engineers can implement for first office application in 2028. So when you think about 6G, think about what technology is around this year and next year, because that's what will get deployed at scale. And if I think about that, then clearly the single technology that exists today that is growing is going to be the effect of foundation models and large language models in AI. whether it be on the security of those systems, whether it be on extracting information from those 6G networks, which will be at larger scale than 5G, to enable us to operate them at reduced cost. But the technology that will, I think, affect 6G most is going to be very large amounts of data feeding into large language models. Yes, the quantum iceberg is even cooler than an iceberg, is something we need to bake into the technology, so as you say, we can replace the security technology as it goes along. Don't panic about it, just figure out how to make it pluggable.
So make it pluggable, don't panic. Pablo, your sort of thoughts?
I agree with Zig that artificial intelligence will be probably the biggest topic in the future. And over the last 6 months, everyone is talking about generative AI. So to a large extent, generative AI has replaced the metaverse. In 2022, the metaverse was the big topic, and now it's artificial intelligence. So it's important to really work as an industry and in partnership with other industries to shape the use of AI for consumers and enterprises. Going back to the 6G point, if we think about 6G as a technology for machines, for enterprise use cases, we need to think, are enterprises ready to embrace 6G for machines? Because obviously, when we want to scale the use of 6G for enterprise IoT applications, it means that enterprises need to know about security, need to know about IoT, and perhaps not many enterprises are aware. So there is an effort that needs to be done to make sure that enterprises are aware of this opportunity, these capabilities, and can take benefit.
So getting the enterprises ready. And finally to Kirsty to close out the panel, your thoughts on what we need to do right and what we need to enable in 6G moving forward.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm also not a telco expert, so I'm going to keep this one pretty brief. If you're working in the industry, then my advice, 2 pieces. First would be decide now if you're going to be a leader or a follower. Both are fine, right? But are you going to be the one that's helping develop those standards? Are you leading? Are you putting your requirements in? Are you really at the forefront of that innovation? Or are you following what your peers are going to do? Both are fine. Just decide what you want to be, a leader or a follower. And the second thing is, in either case, don't have a failure of imagination. When it comes to that innovation piece, we're talking about AI because ChatGPT came out last year. But what would come out next year? Would we have ever imagined that it would have the impact and be so accessible as it is today? So just don't have a failure of imagination. Really open up your mind to the innovation that could be possible, and then decide if you want to be a leader or a follower in making sure that technology can be achieved.
So with that, I'd like you to join with me in thanking the panel for the final session of M360 London. Well done. If not, I'll shout. For those who know me well, my voice usually carries. So there we have it. We've started with the opening with Mats, talking about connectivity. We've talked about incentives and what motivates attackers. We've covered a lot over the 2 days. For those who are familiar with Mobile World Live, as hopefully you're aware, most of these sessions have been recorded, and once the team have had a little bit of a break from organising it, you know who you are at the back, then the videos will be available. So I would encourage you, if you've missed any of the sessions or want to follow up, that some of that material will be available. If I can also say a big thank you to the team at the back, including Alex, Gina, Irene, Sam, who's escaped, and Rich. Not sure. Yeah, I've got waving in the back. But thank you to the GSMA team behind this. For Sam, I, and Rich, and others who have sort of run the event from the front. We've had the easy bit. Most of the seamless putting it together goes to them. So thank you very much for that. As I say, this is it for M360 London for this year. Hopefully look out, join us next year. But that isn't it for security. there are a number of worldwide events coming up. So for those of you not from the UK, M360 will continue through a number of other regions, including M360 in Korea, which is the one I've got off the top of my head, in September. But have a look on the GSMA M360 website. There are a set of events. If you're interested specifically in security, security will return for MWC Vegas at the end of September. So if you don't want to have to listen to me and Sam and several others, then don't come. But if you do, we'd love to see you in Vegas. We will be talking more about private 5G. That's one of the key topics. We're also going to be talking about mobile phone security and some exciting developments. And then we've got the SecCon to go with it. And obviously, MWC Barcelona, we are intending to run a much bigger security track next year. Be careful what I wish for there. Sam's going to keep us busy. But with that, thank you very much for attending. Thank you to our sponsors, Fortinet, Huawei, MasterCard, and Unmanned Life. Have a great that you've joined us, and look forward to seeing you in 2024 when we're back in London. With that, thank you once more to the panel. The event is closed.